Thanks for that. What we'll do is we'll leave off right where we come back right where we started here. I've just got the shot with the point clouds, and I'm going to go ahead and import the work that Daryl did on this shot. And this is essentially a piece of geometry, a static piece of geometry that of course fits my camera because I made the camera. I'm going to just scrub through here. You can see how if I just maybe tidy up a little bit, I'm going to just hide these so that you could take a look to see that that same idea of using, if we just look at our camera view here, all I need to do is switch my camera to stereo. You're going to see the same thing that you saw over there, which is it laid out in space. If I want to, though, I could actually take my my parallax, my center of depth here, and move it back and forth. We'll do that again in just a second. But the next task ahead of us is to put the essentially the world back on. You can see based on this view here, just really taking a moment to see how the approach that we take here to deal with 2D to 3D stereo is really a 3D perspective. It's the ability to take the world laid out exactly as you need, a camera flying through it, and doing those really high quality essentially finished shots is going to take sometimes this kind of discipline. Let's drop in our footage now. So here it is. This is essentially the footage that I'm going to put in. I'm going to just take a blank geometry here, and as I essentially assign it here, let's just take a look at how this works. You're going to see first of all that I'm going to show you the wrong way effectively. If I turn off my shading here, you're going to see the images, but you're going to see it kind of messed up. You probably don't want to look at that with your glasses. I'll just switch from UV wrap to camera projection wrap. So now things are back to normal, right? They're the way they should work. And the reason is that we've wrapped this from the point of view of the camera. If I scrub through the shot here, you can see how it works perfectly because it's using the footage that generated the track. It's basically a way of laying out using depth in a meaningful way. So this gets us a good way. If you just take a look at this guy over here, you can see how if I wanted to, I would use my camera depth at this point. So I'm going to just pick my camera, and what we'll do is we'll just grab this guy and say I want to set some of the stereo attributes. I want to bring the zero parallax to here. I want to animate over time where that zero parallax is going to be. And what I'm effectively doing is I'm picking, okay, that tree right there is going to be at screen depth, hence the way it doesn't have any separation. Picking that tree right there. But it also exposes another problem, something that we just talked about, and that is the need for fine edges. So you can see here where the geometry, those big balls there for the tree, are actually spilling onto the background area, right? So how do we deal with that? We need to cut away at the geometry so that the horse there, the unicorn, does not essentially appear at the depth of the tree. So I use a bunch of techniques for that. I just want to show you a couple of examples of how this is where you really do the refinement that can really finish off something. If we just zoom in here, I'm just going to take a close look at this, and you'll be able to see how at certain points in this shot, it's really quite critical that this works well. So if I take, for example, this section right here, you can really see the problem. So I'm just going to show you very deliberately here so you can see, if I just grab this point here, you can see the issue, right? So the geometry is making the horse appear at the wrong depth. My roto here is refining that down, so you're not getting an artifact. You're not getting the issue of the difference in depth, essentially the misrepresentation of that. So these are the techniques we use. We of course would go a bit further with a whole bunch of mats that are being driven by the camera here into place, and just one last look around, you can really understand how we cut the different pieces out in the depth that they need to be. There's the trees, there's the whole environment kind of laid out for us. So it's pretty neat technique here. The kitchen shot, which is actually sitting down here, I'm just going to show you how you'd start with an FBX. So this is what Daryl made. You can see as we scrub through here, there's our man that's got the same technique. He's a little larger than he needs to be. If we look at our wireframe view, I think you can see that did a really good job of laying out the geometry and the wireframe for our man here. He is this animated geometry, so cached FBX data that is available to us here without any scripts. We just bring it straight in. And what I do is I would go a little further to actually isolate him. There's a few techniques that go into this much bigger setup here. We've got over here in the lower left the build for the guy, and up here we're dealing with what we call pixel spread to work with parallax artifacts and effects. So let me just come into here a little bit. You'll be able to see that what's happening here is we're using a combination of techniques. We're using mats, we're using keys to get the fine edge. And indeed, this is important when you're trying to key something that wasn't intended to be keyed, right? You might have to go and get some of the big iron out. You might have to go and use your Modular Keyer, your 3D Keyer, which is one of our tools that is named such as based on this little UI here. I might go ahead and dial in a key for different parts to really get that super soft edge that we need to be able to pull off hair edges, and then we'll do different keys for different parts of the scene. So you can just see how the intersecting mats form the bounding boxes, and then the keys provide the fine edge. So you can just see how you can decide, okay, that's not going to work over there. I'm going to blend it right about here to get a good result for me. Okay, so let's now just think about one of the problems that you often get also when trying to refine stereo work, and that is the issue of look-around effect or parallax artifacts. And what I mean by that is if you actually project onto multiple things, what's going to happen here, we're just going to pop into the master comp here, is that you're going to start to get some effects where you see a kind of an edge. You might have seen it as we've been going along. On the edge of the jacket there, in his hair, what's happening, and the reason that we see that, is that we're essentially using one wrap. If we just have a look in here, you can see that the stuff for his actual hair edge, it looks okay. But the cabinets are being projected by the same dirty plate, if you like. We don't have a clean plate. We're not using that technique right now, although it's a cool one too. But he's appearing in the background, because when we pull him forward, on one eye we look around him this way, on the other eye we look around him that way, so you can see that artifact of the guy in the background. So how do we deal with that? Well, one way that we work with it is this technique called pixel spread. So we're using that incoming mat, which we would break into components. That's why there's so many nodes. But we want to do an effect that does something kind of neat. Let's just turn it back on again so you can see how I can suck in the pixels. And if I really overdrive it a little bit, you can see this effect. We don't need that much. We really just need enough to avoid the artifacting on the edges, right? So let me just show you one last time in context how we solve this particular problem. I'm going to just view the end of the pipe here, but take a look at this guy. So if we come up here, you're looking at my comp, and as I turn off and on, it's actually off right now, but if you have a look, I'll show you how when I turn on my pixel spread, it improves the overall effect significantly. So these are some of the techniques we use to be able to solve some of those difficult problems with edges. We're really just combining techniques here. We're using the geometry projection technique here to really sell the different layers of depth and detailed shapes in a scene. So let's step back out of here and just consider the way that after more work here you would get to perhaps a finished timeline where there's a comp on every shot. And then one last thing to consider is that as you work, as you're compositing, you might build extra assets. Mats would be one. Another fun thing that you can use when you're working with stereo, of course, is this idea of depth. And indeed, our action output is able to output certain deliverables for us. Mats is one, Z-depth is another. So this is just a great little thing to have with you as you continue down your pipeline. And the next thing we're going to look at is grading. So final grading of a stereo piece that was mono in the beginning. Just to review then, what you've been looking at so far is the Flame Premium working together with the Flare workstation. It's easy to imagine how you could collaborate with multiple compositors to really get your shots done. But we also looped in our CG animation tool, Maya, there to build some of the sort of higher functions of our solution that includes FBX. So we're taking advantage of geometry cache. We're using essentially the camera, the point clouds, some of those functions that allow us to really nail it. Hopefully you can see those work pretty well. So if we come back in here to our grading environment, what I'm doing now is I'm looking ahead to sort of the end of the process where maybe we want to do that final bit of sweetening, final grading on our timeline, which has made it all the way through here. You can start to see the stereo layers actually broken out here, and a few mats in there. These purple ones are the mat containers. And if I just sort of go about my business of grading here, you'll be able to see there's a few things that make it special to be grading in stereo, but happily there are a few things that are very, very normal. If I just flick it between my two eyes here, you can see the left eye, right eye on a shot like this. If I maybe look at this shot, you'll be able to see a left eye, right eye also. All right, so that's one way of checking the difference between them. If I wanted to, I could also use a sort of a two-up view in this situation, which is this button right here. I'll just go ahead and say dual view to be able to see a left and right of each shot as we go along. So maybe we'll just start on our first shot here, and I'll just loop it around here to show you the pieces that we would use. And the reason that you would want to do, essentially a real-time grading pass, or something you certainly might want to do, is turn on your sync button so that things happen to both eyes at once. Although it's an interesting concept here. What we would do is we would lay out a basic look here. Maybe we'll jump into some of our selective tools, just taking the blue of his jacket, adjusting it a little bit, taking his skin tone, adjusting it. These are just functions that you would do naturally to refine your image. Maybe I'll throw on a shape here to be able to further vignette this image or something like that. We come like this, add a soft edge, and if I jump into my grading here, you'll be able to tell that outside my shape is the place to work, and I can then darken down. This happens naturally on both sides of the image, so both left eye and right eye are affected, and I might decide that that's a good template to send on down through my timeline. So I'm just going to drag and drop that, and the next thing that you might think about with a shot like this, well, first of all, you might maybe save your work. So maybe we'll just go ahead and save this as an item we could come back to in our grade bin. But specifically, this is where you might store different alternates, different looks that you decided you like. And what we just stumbled on there was was one of our other tracking tools that we could use here if we wanted on this shot, our shape tracker. So let's just define a more detailed outline for this guy. You remember we did this technique when we were working with the hand. It's the same tool, but available to us here for the purpose of color grading. It's a neat little technique where we can come in here and then we can just hit analyze, if you like, on this and follow that movement through the scene. And then back we come, just sort of dealing with the overall drift. I would just maybe refine it a little bit more, but the great thing to note here is that you're not going to have to deal too much with this because you're probably going to use a softness anyway, as you're just trying to fade this guy forward perhaps in your scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just add a little soft edge here, just to get him kind of toned in there. I'm working synchronously at the moment, but I wanted to point out that if I put my grade in here, what I could do is get a basic look and feel for this. But if I felt that things weren't perfectly synced from left eye to right eye, what I would do is I would exit my sync mode for a moment, maybe make some changes to the overall, tweak this a little bit on the right eye, and then resync, continue on from there, and start my grading process. So you can just get the idea that this is a neat way to just further refine your scene. If we spin on down our timeline, another optimization that we use in grading to be able to work efficiently is the ability to be able to sort your timeline. So we come in here and perhaps do a camera ascending timecode or C mode sort. We could roll out heads and tails if we'd like. And this is just a great technique to get the equivalent shots close to each other. So you're able to see here all the shots of the bird all together, so we could start to compare those, do with our whole timeline or just a subsection of them. What we'll do here is we'll just dial this down a little bit more, get it right, and so on. So working in context like this, in special context that relates to grading, is definitely useful. I think that I wanted to jump in to show you how we might use those extra matte assets, and one extra creative tool that I'd like to show you in just a moment. So let's just jump out of our sort mode here, go back to work our way down to the matte that we had attached to this kitchen shot. It's kind of an interesting idea. You can imagine that you could work with mattes in the system here. These ones are visible to us right here. Any shot that has one of these little containers on, we can work with. And if I just sort of go fishing around here to look at what I've got, I remember I put in this matte. This was the tree isolation that you could work with. These are the cabinets. Also then I have an extra asset here. Let's just go to this one. Unlimited mattes, by the way, in here if you'd like to use them. But here's my depth. That is really a kind of it's a high con adjustment, right? Where I could maybe just play with it a little bit. I'm just going to shrink it down a bit here to be able to get a matte, if you like, or a treatment that I would never be able to get. And this is the idea of a progressive effect of grading into the back of the room in this point. So I'm using that matte, and I'm going to apply it so you can see that it's making it lighter in the back, making it darker in the back. So you could just see this. You could go all the way down here to really make a set of shade in there, or maybe just a little more subtle. Let's just do something like that. We'll use that same tool in reverse, and hopefully you'll be able to get the idea that this is a neat way to work. I can come in here and I can just grab my depth. I'm going to invert it, and I'm going to come all the way forward so that we're just brightening up the guy's hand. If that's what I want, let's just do that. So then I can do is I can see if that was an important part of the scene, you could really give emphasis to it sticking out, let's say, in stereo by doing this kind of an adjustment. So really just an interesting idea of creatively using the assets that you've got. One last thing to show you here, and I'll play you back our final, and that was, remember this shot here, where we had a visual effects shot, we had a shadow for our bird, but I decided not to essentially put it into the final render, because who knows how much shadow you want, and those are the kind of things that are very subjective. And you might be finaling this shot all the way through, and even when you've got your stereo, I wanted to show you how you can carry assets forward towards your final grading session, perhaps. So you would come in here, and you would get your overall look for a shot like this. Let's just get it warmed up, and then you can see that the bird maybe doesn't match perfectly. So I've got a bunch of different little mats in here that I could carry forward. One is the bird, and I believe it's actually this one. You probably just saw go by the shadow. In fact, let's do the shadow first. Let's just jump in and let's just apply the effect. We'll go outside because it's dark, and we can just use that matte to generate shadow. And of course, this can be as intense as we like, as return as much as we like, and you can really get the idea that this is a quick way of doing this, and just by essentially changing out the effect here, I could even nuance the color I want for my shadow, of course, and to dial it in a little bit. That's one thing that's kind of cool. The bird still looks a little dark, so let's go grab that next matte for him. So what we'll do is we'll just come back to our matte view here and pick up the bird matte. If I go back to my single view, by the way, at this point, it's of course crucial that that you have two mattes at this point, right? Because you made a stereo comp. You're going to need a left eye shadow and a right eye shadow. They're here ready to go. Let's just work with the bird matte at this point, which of course also is stereo. And then as I just dial him in a little bit, you'll be able to see how this works. So I can just get kind of a nice subtle tone in there that gets me my bird in the place that I want him without interfering with the rest of the shot. Now, what if they say at this point, maybe those bricks aren't quite right. Maybe you may want to make more changes, or maybe you just need a little bit of something to to kind of give this last little bit of sheen or gloss or depth, or make it look a little less CG-ish. And what I did is I made a couple of passes anticipating that you might say that. And these are just essentially video layers that are stacked in here. See, I put 5 layers in here, and what they are is they're different colored textures that are in place of that brick wall. It's a generator, remember, the brick wall, but now I use like elastic bands to make an effect here. And what I thought might be cool would be to take that and essentially use that as a mat, so that I can then come in here and grade through it and get this kind of overlaid effect here. You could work inside and outside that, of course, to get yourself a kind of a fun look. The one problem that we do have, though, of course, is that we've kind of killed our bird effect by putting that onto it. So maybe we like that kind of wall look, but what we need to do here, of course, is we need to go back to our mats and remove this. So we have our Boolean operations here that we can work with. So we can say we want to do a combination of those mats. So what I really want, I think, is that, right? So I want the inverse of this op, and then this will give me essentially a clean holdout for the bird. And I could even then kind of work on the inside here and tweak that out. So I've still got essentially the bird there, and I've got on here I've got the rest of it. Okay, so you can really see how up to the last minute with the right assets you can really make a difference to your to your job. So we'll just bring this down a little bit, and that's kind of cool. Let me just finish up by playing you back a bunch of the shots that we've been doing today. And what you'll be able to see when you put your glasses on here is really just a selection of what we've been doing, and hopefully you can really sort of appreciate the different techniques that we've been using here as well. Let's go ahead and play this back. With your glasses on, you'll be able to see from a mono original, different levels of complexity, adding depth via cards, effects, and then taking in some cases a much deeper approach with 3D geometry and rotoscoping, more effects, and here's some layout in the room using that geometry, animated mesh, cache, some cards and displacement, and then essentially how deep, how far do you want to go with your stereo? You can do it quickly. You can essentially spend more time and more collaboration as well as our building, and then some visual effects shots that naturally get stereo from adding a camera. Here's our wall and bird, and separating out key elements and so on. So really kind of hopefully it gives you a good overview of the technology we use for 2D to 3D conversion or redimensionalization. What you've just been looking at is Flame Premium, Flare, and also Maya working together to take mono assets and put them into stereoscopic 3D. Thanks for listening, guys. Appreciate it.